In the grand halls of Belmont Palace, where centuries of tradition echoed through marble corridors, a single moment captured on security cameras would shatter the carefully maintained facade of the royal family forever. What began as an ordinary afternoon tea would expose dark secrets, hidden cruelties, and a power struggle that threatened to destroy the monarchy from within. When Prince Alexander discovered the shocking footage of his stepmother's true nature toward his beloved daughter, Princess Elena, he faced an impossible choice: protect his family's reputation or shield his child from a woman whose smile masked a heart of stone. But some secrets are too dangerous to keep buried, and some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. This is the story of how one brave security guard's conscience, one father's love, and one little girl's courage brought down the most feared woman in the kingdom. The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Belmont Palace as Security Chief Marcus Thompson reviewed the daily surveillance footage in his cramped office. 23 years of protecting the royal family had taught him to notice details others missed, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to discover on the afternoon of October 15th. Marcus had been reviewing footage from the East Wing when something caught his attention. The timestamp read 3:47 p.m., and the camera captured the ornate children's playroom where 8-year-old Princess Elena often spent her afternoons. The little girl with golden curls was sitting quietly at her miniature tea table, arranging her dolls with the careful precision that had made her a favorite among the palace staff. The door opened, and Duchess Victoria Ashworth entered the frame. Prince Alexander's second wife had married into the royal family 3 years ago, bringing with her an air of sophistication that charmed the public and press alike. Her perfectly styled auburn hair and designer clothes made her a fashion icon, while her charitable work had earned her widespread admiration. But Marcus had always sensed something cold beneath her polished exterior. Victoria approached Princess Elena with her usual graceful stride, her smile bright for any cameras that might be watching. The little princess looked up hopefully, her face lighting up with the innocent joy that children reserve for those they trust. Marcus turned up the volume, though the old security system's audio was often unreliable. "Good afternoon, Elena, dear." Victoria's voice came through clearly, sweet as honey. "How are your dolls today?" Princess Elena's response was barely audible, but Marcus could see her lips moving as she explained her elaborate tea party setup. Her stepmother nodded and smiled, playing the part of the caring guardian perfectly. For a moment, Marcus wondered if his instincts about the Duchess had been wrong. Then, everything changed. Princess Elena accidentally knocked over her small teacup, sending it clattering to the floor. The delicate porcelain shattered into several pieces, and the child's face immediately crumpled with worry. She bent down quickly to gather the fragments, her small hand shaking as she tried to fix what couldn't be repaired. Victoria's smile vanished like a mask being ripped away. Her face transformed into something Marcus had never seen before, a cold fury that made his blood run cold. Without warning, her hand flew through the air, striking Princess Elena across the cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the speakers. The little girl fell backward, tears immediately streaming down her reddened face. But Victoria wasn't finished. She grabbed Elena's arm roughly, yanking her to her feet with such force that the child cried out in pain. "You clumsy little brat," Victoria hissed, her cultured accent making the cruel words sound even more venomous. "Can't you do anything right?" This cup was worth more than most people make in a month. Princess Elena sobbed harder, trying to pull away from the painful grip, but Victoria only tightened her hold. "Stop that crying this instant, or I'll give you something real to cry about. Do you understand me?" The child nodded frantically, using her free hand to wipe her tears while Victoria continued her verbal assault. "Your father thinks you're so precious, but I see what you really are. You're nothing but a spoiled little accident who ruined everything. If you ever tell anyone about this, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." Marcus felt sick watching the scene unfold. This was no momentary loss of temper. The calculated cruelty in Victoria's voice, the way she looked around to ensure they were alone, the practiced nature of her threats, all pointed to something far more sinister than a single incident. The Duchess released Elena's arm with a sharp push, sending the child stumbling back into her chair. "Clean up this mess and get out of my sight. And remember what I told you about keeping your mouth shut." Victoria smoothed her hair, adjusted her jacket, and within seconds her public face was back in place. She walked to the door with the same elegant grace she had entered with, leaving behind a traumatized little girl who was desperately trying to stop crying while picking up the broken pieces of her teacup. Marcus sat in stunned silence, staring at the screen long after Victoria had left, and Elena had quietly gathered her dolls and retreated to her bedroom. His hands were shaking as he rewound the footage and watched it again, hoping somehow he had misunderstood what he'd seen. But there was no mistake. The woman the world admired as a loving stepmother had just revealed herself to be something monstrous. The way she had threatened Elena, the practiced ease of her cruelty, suggested this was not an isolated incident. How long had this been happening? How many times had Princess Elena suffered in silence while the public praised Victoria's devotion to her stepdaughter? Marcus's mind raced through the implications. Prince Alexander clearly had no idea what was happening. The devoted father would never have allowed such treatment of his daughter if he knew. But how could Marcus tell him? The accusation would destroy the royal family if it became public knowledge, and Victoria was clever enough to have left no other evidence. Yet how could he not tell him? Every day that passed meant more opportunities for Victoria to hurt Elena. The little girl's recent quietness, her reluctance to play with other children, her tendency to flinch when adults raised their voices, all the signs had been there, but everyone had attributed them to normal childhood shyness. Marcus looked at his phone, then at the computer screen showing the damning footage. Prince Alexander was currently in London for a series of meetings, but he would return to the palace that evening. The security chief had always prided himself on his discretion and loyalty to the royal family, but this situation demanded action that went beyond protecting their reputation. He made copies of the footage on 3 separate drives, securing them in different locations. If Victoria discovered what he had seen, she would certainly try to destroy the evidence. The woman who could strike a child and threaten her so casually wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any threat to her position. As Marcus prepared to leave his office, he caught sight of Princess Elena through the window, walking alone in the garden with her bodyguard following at a respectful distance. Even from this distance, he could see the sadness in her small shoulders, the careful way she moved, as if trying to make herself invisible. The little girl who should have been laughing and playing was instead carrying the weight of secrets no child should have to bear. Marcus knew that what he did next would change everything for the royal family, but Princess Elena's safety had to come first. He locked the footage securely in his safe and headed toward the main palace, knowing that by evening, the carefully constructed world of Belmont Palace would begin to crumble. The truth had a way of demanding to be heard, and some secrets were too important to keep buried. The rain continued to fall against the windows as Marcus prepared to destroy the life of one of the most powerful women in the kingdom, all for the sake of a little girl who deserved so much better than the nightmare she was living. Prince Alexander arrived at Belmont Palace as the evening sun cast long shadows across the ancient stone walls. His day in London had been filled with tedious meetings about trade agreements and diplomatic protocols, and he looked forward to spending time with Princess Elena before her bedtime. The 8-year-old was the light of his life, especially since losing his first wife, Elena's mother, to cancer 5 years ago. As his car pulled up to the main entrance, Alexander noticed Security Chief Thompson waiting by the steps, an unusual occurrence that immediately put him on alert. Marcus had served the royal family faithfully for over 2 decades, and his presence here suggested something important. "Your Highness," Marcus said, bowing slightly as Alexander approached. "I apologize for interrupting your evening, but there's an urgent matter that requires your immediate attention." Alexander studied the older man's face, noting the tension around his eyes and the way his hands seemed to tremble slightly. "Of course, Marcus. What's troubling you?" "It concerns Princess Elena, sir. I need to show you something in my office, if you would be so kind." The prince's expression immediately hardened with concern. "Is Elena hurt? Where is she?" "She's safe in her room with her governess, sir. But there's something you need to see before we proceed further." Alexander followed Marcus through the palace corridors, his mind racing with possibilities. The security chief's obvious distress suggested something serious, but he couldn't imagine what could have happened to Elena in the safety of the palace walls. Marcus's office was cramped and functional, lined with monitors and filing cabinets that contained decades of security records. The older man moved to his computer with obvious reluctance, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard. "Your Highness, what I'm about to show you will be extremely difficult to watch. I debated whether to bring this to your attention at all, but Princess Elena's welfare must come first." Alexander sat down heavily in the chair Marcus offered, his stomach already knotting with dread. "Just show me, Marcus." The footage began playing, and Alexander watched his daughter's innocent afternoon tea party with growing confusion.
Why would Marcus consider this urgent?
But as the scene unfolded, and Victoria entered the frame, Alexander began to understand. He watched his wife's charming interaction with Elena, wondering what he was supposed to be seeing. Then, the teacup fell, and Alexander's world exploded. He watched in horror as the woman he had married, the woman he had trusted with his most precious treasure, struck his daughter with vicious force. The sound of the slap seemed to echo through the small office, and Alexander felt physically ill as he watched Elena's small body crumple under the blow. "Stop it," he whispered, but Marcus shook his head. "You need to see all of it, sir." Alexander forced himself to watch as Victoria grabbed Elena's arm, as she spat her venomous threats, as she promised consequences if the child ever spoke of this abuse. His hands clenched into fists as he heard the woman he had shared his bed with call his beloved daughter a spoiled little accident. When the footage ended, Alexander sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Marcus waited patiently, understanding that the prince needed time to process what he had witnessed. "How long?" Alexander finally asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I don't know, sir. This is the first time I've caught anything on camera, but based on Princess Elena's recent behavior... Recent behavior? Marcus cleared his throat carefully. "She's been quieter than usual, sir. More withdrawn. She flinches when adults raise their voices. And she's been having nightmares that wake the entire East Wing. The staff assumed it was normal childhood adjustment, but now..." Alexander buried his face in his hands. How had he missed this? How had he failed to protect his own daughter? All the signs had been there, but he had been so grateful that Victoria seemed to care for Elena that he hadn't looked deeper. Where is she now? Where is Victoria? "The Duchess is preparing for the charity gala dinner this evening, sir. Princess Elena is in her room, supposedly feeling unwell. She asked not to attend dinner tonight." Alexander's jaw tightened. Of course she did. She was probably terrified of facing Victoria again so soon. He stood up abruptly, pacing the small office like a caged animal. "How many copies of this footage exist?" "3, sir, all secured. I thought it best to preserve the evidence." "Good thinking." Alexander stopped pacing and fixed Marcus with an intense stare. "I need you to do something for me, and it must remain absolutely confidential until I decide how to proceed." "Of course, Your Highness. I want you to review every piece of security footage from the past 6 months. Every interaction between Victoria and Elena when they thought they were alone. I need to know the full extent of this abuse." Marcus nodded grimly. "It will take some time, sir, but I'll begin immediately." Alexander headed for the door, then stopped. "Marcus, thank you. I know this couldn't have been easy for you."
Princess Elena is a special little girl, sir. She deserves better than this.
Alexander made his way through the palace toward Elena's room, his mind racing with plans for confronting Victoria. But first, he needed to see his daughter, to somehow begin repairing the damage he had failed to prevent. He knocked gently on Elena's door before entering. She was sitting on her bed in her pajamas, reading a book with unusual intensity. When she saw him, her face lit up briefly before clouding over with worry. "Daddy!" "You're home early. I wanted to see my favorite princess before bedtime," Alexander said, sitting on the edge of her bed. Up close, he could see the faint redness on her cheek where Victoria had struck her, and his heart broke all over again. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart? I heard you weren't well enough for dinner." Elena's eyes darted away from his face, and she nodded too quickly. "Just tired, Daddy. I played too hard today." Alexander gently touched her chin, turning her face towards his. "Elena, you know you can tell me anything, don't you? Anything at all?" For a moment he saw something flicker in her eyes, a desperate desire to unburden herself. But then fear took over, and she nodded silently. "I love you more than anything in the world," Alexander continued, "and I will always, always protect you. Do you believe that?" "Yes, Daddy," Elena whispered, and he could hear the doubt in her voice that cut him to the core. After tucking Elena into bed and kissing her goodnight, Alexander made his way to the master bedroom, where Victoria was putting the finishing touches on her appearance for the evening's gala. She looked stunning in her emerald silk gown, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. To anyone watching, she was the picture of elegant royalty. "Darling," she exclaimed when she saw him. "You're cutting it close for the dinner. The guests will be arriving within the hour." Alexander stood in the doorway, studying the woman he thought he knew. "Actually, Victoria, there's been a change of plans. We won't be attending tonight." She turned from her mirror, confusion flickering across her perfect features.
"What do you mean? This dinner has been planned for months."
The Prime Minister will be there, along with half the cabinet. I said we're not going. Alexander's voice was deadly calm, and something in his tone made Victoria take a step back. Alexander, what's gotten into you? You're acting very strangely. He moved fully into the room, closing the door behind him. I had an interesting conversation with Marcus Thompson this evening. He showed me some fascinating security footage from this afternoon. Victoria's face went completely white, but she quickly tried to recover. Security footage? I don't understand, don't you? Alexander pulled out his phone and played a short clip from the damning recording. Victoria's own voice filled the room, calling Elena a spoiled little accident, threatening her with consequences for telling the truth. Victoria sank onto the bed, her careful composure finally cracking. Alexander, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Really. Because it looks like you struck my daughter and threatened her into silence. It looks like you've been abusing a defenseless child while I wasn't here to protect her. She broke an antique teacup. Do you know how much that cost? I don't care if she broke the crown jewels. Alexander's voice rose dangerously. She's an 8-year-old child, and you had no right to touch her. Victoria tried a different approach, her voice becoming pleading. Alexander, please. I lost my temper for one moment. It will never happen again, I swear. 1 moment? Alexander laughed bitterly. How long has this been going on, Victoria? How many times have you hurt my daughter when I wasn't there to see it? I've never. It was just today, I promise. Don't lie to me. I've already ordered a complete review of all security footage. If you've been abusing Elena, I will find every instance of it. Victoria stood up, trying to regain her composure.
You're overreacting, Alexander.
One little slap doesn't constitute abuse. Children need discipline. Get out. What? Get out of my palace. Get out of my sight. Pack your things and leave, tonight. Victoria's mask finally fell completely away, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. You can't just throw me out, Alexander. I'm your wife. I have rights, position, influence. If you try to humiliate me publicly, I'll destroy you. Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more threatening than any shout. You put your hands on my child. You threatened her. You terrorized a little girl who lost her mother and was looking for someone to love her. There is nothing you could do to me that would be worse than what you've already done. The battle lines were drawn, and Victoria realized she was fighting for everything she had worked to achieve. This wouldn't be the end of their confrontation, but the beginning of a war that would determine the future of the royal family. The charity gala would proceed without the prince and his wife, but by morning, the palace would be buzzing with rumors about the sudden illness that had kept them away. Only a select few would know the truth about what had really happened in the royal chambers that night, and how the fate of the monarchy hung in the balance of one man's love for his daughter. Victoria Ashworth was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. Born into minor nobility with grand ambitions, she had clawed her way to the pinnacle of power by marrying Prince Alexander, and she had no intention of letting one moment of exposed cruelty destroy everything she had built. As she packed her belongings in the early hours of the morning, her mind was already working on damage control. Alexander's ultimatum to leave the palace immediately had been delivered with the force of royal command. But Victoria knew that public perception was everything in their world. If she could control the narrative, she might yet salvage her position. Her phone buzzed with a text from her personal assistant. Media, asking about your absence from last night's gala. How should I respond? Victoria smiled coldly as she typed back. Tell them I'm taking some time to focus on personal matters. Nothing more. She had spent 3 years carefully crafting her image as the perfect stepmother, the charitable duchess who had brought love back into Prince Alexander's life after his tragic loss. The public adored her, and she had influential friends throughout the government and media. Alexander might have seen her true nature, but proving it to the world would be another matter entirely. Meanwhile, Security Chief Marcus Thompson was discovering that Victoria's cruelty ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Working through the night, he had found 17 separate incidents over the past 6 months where Victoria had been alone with Princess Elena. Each recording told a story of escalating psychological and physical abuse. In one clip from 3 months ago, Victoria had locked Elena in a storage closet for an hour after the child had accidentally spilled juice on important documents. In another, she had forced the 8-year-old to stand perfectly still for 45 minutes as punishment for laughing too loudly during a phone call. The pattern was clear and calculated. Victoria waited until she was certain they wouldn't be interrupted, then unleashed her fury on a defenseless child. Marcus printed timeline reports and evidence summaries, his hands shaking with anger as he worked. Each incident was dated and documented, building an irrefutable case against the woman who had fooled an entire kingdom. At dawn, Prince Alexander sat in his study reviewing Marcus's preliminary findings. Each page made his stomach turn, but he forced himself to read every detail. His daughter had been living in a nightmare while he remained blissfully unaware, traveling for royal duties and trusting Victoria to care for Elena in his absence. The worst part was seeing how Elena had tried to protect herself. In several recordings, the little girl could be seen attempting to clean up accidents before Victoria discovered them, or practicing how to walk quietly to avoid attention. She had been living in constant fear of triggering her stepmother's rage. A soft knock interrupted his reading. "Come in." Princess Elena peeked around the door, still in her pajamas with her golden hair mussed from sleep. "Daddy, I heard voices last night." "Is everything okay?" Alexander's heart broke seeing the worry in her young face. Even after everything she had endured, she was concerned about others' well-being. "Come here, sweetheart." Elena climbed onto his lap, and Alexander held her carefully, noticing how she still tensed slightly at unexpected movements. "Elena, I need to tell you something important. Victoria won't be living with us anymore." The relief that flashed across Elena's face was so profound that Alexander had to fight back tears. "Is she angry with me? Did I do something wrong?" "No, my darling girl. You did nothing wrong. Nothing that happened was your fault. Do you understand me?" Elena nodded, but Alexander could see years of conditioning in her careful responses. Victoria had trained her to accept blame for adult anger, to believe she was responsible for the cruelty inflicted upon her. "Elena, I know this might be scary, but I need you to tell me about the times when Victoria was mean to you. Can you do that?" For the first time in months, Elena began to speak freely. The words poured out of her in a rush, stories of slaps and harsh words, of being locked away and told she was worthless. Alexander listened with growing fury, making mental notes of incidents that hadn't been captured on camera. As Elena spoke, color returned to her cheeks and her voice grew stronger. The burden of keeping Victoria's secrets had been crushing her spirit, and finally being believed was like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. But while Alexander was learning the full extent of his daughter's suffering, Victoria was launching her counterattack. By mid-morning, she had checked into the most expensive hotel in the capital and was making carefully planned phone calls to her network of influential contacts. Her first call was to Margaret Thornfield, editor of the kingdom's most prestigious society magazine. Margaret had always been sympathetic to Victoria's charitable work and had written glowing articles about her marriage to Alexander. "Margaret, darling, I need your discretion," Victoria said, adding just the right note of vulnerability to her voice. "I'm going through a difficult time with Alexander. Marriage isn't always easy, as you know, and sometimes even fairy tale couples face challenges." Margaret's interest was immediately piqued. A marital crisis in the royal family would be the story of the year. "What kind of challenges, Victoria? You two have always seemed so happy." "Alexander has been under tremendous stress lately, and I'm afraid it's affecting his judgment. He's become suspicious and paranoid, seeing threats where none exist. I'm genuinely concerned about his mental state and about Elena's well-being in this environment." Victoria was careful not to make direct accusations, instead planting seeds of doubt about Alexander's stability, while positioning herself as the concerned stepmother trying to protect her stepdaughter. "I've moved out temporarily, hoping that some space will help him realize how his behavior is affecting Elena. The poor child has been so anxious lately." Margaret was already crafting headlines in her mind. A story about Prince Alexander's mental breakdown would dominate the news cycle for weeks. "Have you considered seeking professional help? Family counseling, perhaps?" "I've tried to suggest it, but Alexander refuses to admit there's a problem. I'm at my wit's end, Margaret. I just want what's best for Elena." Victoria's second call was to Lord Christopher Bentley, a powerful government minister who had always been one of her most devoted supporters. Christopher had harbored romantic feelings for Victoria before her marriage to Alexander, and those feelings could still be useful. "Christopher, I need to speak with you privately. Could we meet for lunch today?" Lord Bentley cleared his schedule immediately. Victoria was one of the most beautiful and intelligent women he knew, and any opportunity to spend time with her was a gift. They met at an exclusive club where privacy was guaranteed and conversations couldn't be overheard. Victoria had chosen her outfit carefully, elegant but slightly disheveled, beautiful but vulnerable. She needed Christopher to see her as a woman in need of protection. "I'm in trouble, Christopher," she began, allowing tears to gather in her eyes. "Alexander has accused me of terrible things, lies that could destroy my reputation and position. He's ordered me out of the palace based on fabricated evidence." Christopher leaned forward, immediately protective. "What kind of accusations?" He claims I've been mistreating Elena, which is absolutely absurd. You know how much I love that child. I've dedicated the past 3 years of my life to being the mother she lost. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief.
I think the stress of royal duties is affecting his mind.
He's become paranoid, seeing conspiracies everywhere. This is outrageous, Christopher declared. Alexander can't just destroy your life based on unfounded suspicions. You have rights as his wife, as a member of the royal family. Victoria nodded sadly. I know, but who would believe me over a prince? I need legal protection, Christopher. I need someone who understands how the system works. Christopher was already making plans. I'll connect you with the best lawyers in the kingdom. We'll fight this, Victoria. I won't let Alexander ruin you. As Victoria continued building her defense network, she was also crafting her public image. She arranged to be photographed visiting children's hospitals, looking appropriately sad, but determined to continue her charitable work, despite personal challenges. The photos would support her narrative of being a devoted stepmother wrongfully accused. Back at the palace, Alexander was consulting with his own advisors about the situation. His private secretary, James Morrison, had served the royal family for 30 years and understood the delicate balance between family privacy and public responsibility. The media is starting to ask questions about Victoria's absence, James reported. Her people are spreading a story about marital difficulties and suggesting you're having some kind of breakdown. Alexander wasn't surprised. He had expected Victoria to fight back, but he hadn't anticipated how quickly she would move to discredit him. What do you recommend?
We need to get ahead of the narrative, sir.
If we wait too long, her version of events will become accepted truth. But we also need to be careful about Princess Elena's privacy. This kind of scandal could traumatize her further. Elena's well-being is my first priority, Alexander said firmly. But I won't let Victoria's lies stand unchallenged. She hurt my daughter, and there will be consequences. James nodded. Then we need to prepare for a very public battle, sir. Victoria won't go quietly, and she has significant support among the social elite. This could get very ugly before it gets better. Alexander looked out the window at the gardens where Elena was playing with her governess, finally showing signs of her old spirit returning. Watching her laugh as she chased butterflies, he felt his resolve strengthen. Whatever Victoria threw at him, whatever lies she told, whatever allies she rallied to her cause, he would endure it all to protect his daughter. The war for the truth was just beginning, and the stakes could not have been higher. The future of the monarchy, the safety of an innocent child, and the credibility of everyone involved hung in the balance. Victoria had drawn first blood with her carefully planned media campaign, but Alexander had something more powerful than influence or connections. He had the truth, and eventually, the truth would win. The question was how much damage would be done before justice prevailed, and whether Elena could be protected from the storm that was about to engulf the royal family. As night fell over Belmont Palace, both sides prepared for the battle that would determine not just their personal futures, but the very integrity of the institution they had all sworn to serve. The morning newspapers hit the stands like bombs exploding across the kingdom. Victoria's carefully orchestrated media campaign had worked with devastating efficiency. The headlines screamed variations of the same theme: royal marriage in crisis, and prince's mental health questioned, and most damaging of all, the loved Duchess fears for stepdaughter's safety. Margaret Thornfield's article in the Society Times was particularly brutal, painting Prince Alexander as a paranoid man whose grief over his first wife's death had finally manifested in dangerous delusions. The piece quoted palace insiders who described him as increasingly erratic and suspicious, unable to distinguish between reality and imagination. Sources close to the royal family expressed deep concern for Princess Elena's well-being, the article read. The Duchess, known for her devoted care of her stepdaughter, has reportedly sought temporary separation to protect the child from what she describes as an increasingly unstable household environment. In her hotel suite, Victoria read the coverage with satisfaction while sipping her morning coffee. Her phone was ringing constantly with requests for interviews and statements of support from various charitable organizations. Public opinion was swinging her way exactly as she had planned. But Victoria had underestimated the determination of Security Chief Marcus Thompson. While she was building her media narrative, Marcus was methodically building his case with the thoroughness of a career law enforcement officer. He had spent the past 36 hours not only reviewing palace security footage, but also interviewing staff members who had witnessed Victoria's treatment of Elena. The testimonies painted a disturbing picture that went far beyond what the cameras had captured. Sarah Mitchell, Elena's governess, had been struggling with her conscience for months, uncertain whether to report what she had observed. "I walked in on them once," Sarah told Marcus, her voice shaking with emotion. Princess Elena was standing in the corner of her room, perfectly still, while the Duchess timed her on her phone. The child had been there for over an hour as punishment for allegedly interrupting an adult conversation. When I asked what was happening, the Duchess said she was teaching Elena proper behavior. Cook Margaret O'Brien had her own horrifying story. "I found Princess Elena hiding in my pantry last month, crying. When I asked what was wrong, she said she was afraid to go back to her room because she had forgotten to make her bed perfectly." The Duchess had apparently told her that sloppy children don't deserve dinner. Groundskeeper Tom Wilson had noticed Elena's behavior during her outdoor playtime. The little princess used to run and laugh in the gardens, but lately she moves so carefully, like she's afraid of making any noise. Children shouldn't walk on eggshells in their own home. Each testimony added another layer to the case against Victoria, but Marcus knew that witness statements alone might not be enough to counter her growing media support. He needed more concrete evidence, something that couldn't be dismissed as staff gossip or misunderstandings. The breakthrough came when he reviewed footage from the palace medical wing. 3 weeks ago, Elena had been taken to see Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the palace physician, for what was reported as a routine checkup. But the security camera had captured something troubling. In the footage, Elena could be seen lifting her shirt to show Dr. Hartwell what appeared to be bruises on her ribs. The doctor's face showed clear concern as she examined the marks. But when she tried to question Elena about how the injuries occurred, the child became withdrawn and frightened. Marcus immediately contacted Dr. Hartwell, who agreed to meet with him despite the delicate nature of the situation. The physician was in her 50s, with the kind of gentle demeanor that made children trust her instantly. "I've been agonizing over this for weeks," Dr. Hartwell admitted when Marcus showed her the footage. "Princess Elena had finger-shaped bruises on her ribs and what appeared to be grip marks on her upper arms. When I asked how she got them, she became terrified and begged me not to tell anyone." "Why didn't you report it?" Marcus asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "She said she fell down the stairs, but the bruise pattern was inconsistent with that type of injury. I wanted to investigate further, but the Duchess arrived during the examination and quickly shepherded Elena away. She said she would handle any follow-up care herself." Dr. Hartwell provided Marcus with her medical notes and photographs of Elena's injuries, documentation that would be impossible for Victoria to explain away. The evidence was mounting into an insurmountable case against the woman who had fooled the world. Meanwhile, Prince Alexander was dealing with the political fallout from Victoria's media offensive. Lord Bentley had used his government connections to launch an informal investigation into Alexander's fitness for royal duties, claiming concern for both Elena's welfare and the stability of the monarchy.
This is unprecedented, Alexander's legal advisor, Sir Richard Blackwood, explained during an emergency meeting.
"The government is using Victoria's accusations to question your capacity to serve. If they formally request a mental health evaluation, it could trigger a constitutional crisis." Alexander felt the walls closing in around him. Victoria's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. By positioning herself as the protector and him as the threat, she had turned the entire establishment against him.
What options do we have?
"We need to present our evidence publicly and force the truth into the open," Sir Richard replied. "But that means exposing Princess Elena to media scrutiny and potentially traumatizing her further. I won't use my daughter as ammunition in a public relations war," Alexander said firmly. "There has to be another way." The solution came from an unexpected source. Queen Mother Isabel, Alexander's formidable mother, had been watching the crisis unfold with growing concern. Despite being in her 70s and officially retired from public duties, she remained one of the most respected figures in the kingdom. "I've known Victoria for 3 years," the Queen Mother told Alexander during a private meeting in her apartments. "I always sensed something cold beneath her charm, but I attributed it to natural reserve. After reading today's papers, I realized my instincts were correct."
What do you suggest, Mother?
"I suggest we stop playing defense and start playing to our strengths. Victoria may have the media and some government allies, but we have something more powerful: the truth, and the loyalty of people who truly know this family." The Queen Mother had been making her own inquiries among the palace staff, many of whom had served the royal family for decades. Their loyalty ran deeper than any media manipulation, and they were willing to testify to what they had witnessed. "Mrs. Henderson has been Elena's head nanny since she was born," the Queen Mother continued. "She's documented every change in that child's behavior over the past months. The housekeeping staff has noticed Elena's tendency to hide when she hears Victoria's voice. Even the horses in the stables have sensed something wrong. shying away from Victoria while remaining calm with everyone else. Alexander felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. Are they willing to speak publicly? They're willing to do whatever it takes to protect Princess Elena. These people have watched her grow up, and they're not about to let anyone hurt her without a fight. As the Queen Mother rallied the palace staff, Marcus was putting the finishing touches on his comprehensive evidence package. 17 separate incidents of abuse captured on video, medical documentation of injuries, witness testimony from credible sources, and a timeline showing the escalating pattern of Victoria's behaviour. But Victoria wasn't finished with her own machinations. She had convinced Lord Bentley to arrange a meeting with the Prime Minister, claiming she had urgent information about Alexander's mental state that threatened national security. "I fear my husband may be suffering from the same mental illness that plagued his great-uncle," Victoria told the Prime Minister with convincing tears in her eyes. Prince Frederick's paranoid delusions nearly caused a diplomatic crisis in the 1960s. "I see the same symptoms in Alexander now, the same unfounded suspicions and erratic behavior." The Prime Minister was deeply troubled by these revelations.
A mentally unstable heir to the throne would indeed pose serious risks to the kingdom's stability.
What kind of evidence are you referring to? He's accused me of abusing Princess Elena based on what he claims is security footage, but I believe the recordings have been doctored.
His paranoia has convinced him that I'm some kind of monster, when all I've done is love and care for his daughter as if she were my own. Victoria's performance was masterful, striking exactly the right notes of concern, love, and reluctant betrayal. She appeared to be a woman torn between loyalty to her husband and duty to her country, forced to expose painful truths for the greater good. "I need you to understand that I'm not doing this to hurt Alexander," she continued. "I'm doing this to save him, and to protect Elena from the chaos that his illness could create. With proper treatment, he could recover completely." The Prime Minister promised to consider her concerns carefully, but privately he was already planning to consult with palace officials about the constitutional implications of an unstable monarch. As evening approached, both sides were preparing for the decisive battle that would determine the future of the royal family. Victoria had successfully positioned herself as a concerned wife trying to protect both her husband and stepdaughter from his own mental illness. Alexander had the truth on his side, but truth often proved less powerful than compelling narrative in the court of public opinion. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either vindicate Prince Alexander's actions or destroy his credibility forever. In the balance hung not just his reputation, but his relationship with his daughter and his right to the throne itself. Princess Elena, unaware of the forces swirling around her, was finally sleeping peacefully, for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would shake the kingdom to its foundations, but for tonight, she was safe in her father's palace, protected by people who truly loved her. The battle for truth was about to reach its climax, and the winner would determine not just who controlled the narrative, but who had the right to protect an innocent child from the monsters that sometimes wore the masks of saints. The day of reckoning arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October, as if even nature sensed the importance of what was about to unfold. Prince Alexander had made a decision that would either save his family or destroy his monarchy. He would present all evidence against Victoria in a formal televised address to the nation, letting the people judge for themselves who was telling the truth. The decision had not been made lightly. Sir Richard Blackwood had warned him repeatedly about the risks. "Once this information becomes public, there's no taking it back," the legal advisor cautioned. "If the people don't believe you, if they think you're the unstable one, you could lose everything." But Alexander had reached a point where protecting Elena mattered more than protecting his crown. "My daughter has suffered enough because I failed to see what was happening under my own roof. I won't let her suffer more because I was too cowardly to tell the truth." Meanwhile, Victoria was putting the finishing touches on her own counteroffensive. She had arranged to appear on the kingdom's most watched morning show immediately after Alexander's address, ready to present herself as a grieving wife forced to watch her husband's mental breakdown from afar. The makeup artist worked carefully on Victoria's appearance, creating the look of a woman bearing tremendous emotional burdens with dignified strength. Her outfit was perfectly chosen, a navy blue dress that conveyed both authority and vulnerability, with Princess Elena's favorite brooch pinned to her lapel as a symbol of her maternal devotion. Remember, her media advisor coached her. Express sorrow, not anger. You're a woman who loves her family too much to watch them destroy themselves. You're protecting Elena by telling the hard truth about Alexander's condition. Victoria nodded, practicing her expression of noble suffering in the mirror. She had convinced even herself that her version of events was true. that Alexander's accusations were products of a paranoid mind that saw abuse where there had only been loving discipline. At Belmont Palace, Security Chief Marcus Thompson was making final preparations for the evidence presentation. He had compiled the footage into a chronological sequence that told an undeniable story of escalating abuse. Dr. Bokovky, Hartwell's medical records were prepared as supporting documentation, along with sworn affidavits from 12 palace staff members who had witnessed Victoria's cruelty. "Are you certain about this approach?" Marcus asked Alexander one final time. "Once we release this footage, Princess Elena's private pain becomes public knowledge. She'll have to live with that for the rest of her life." Alexander had struggled with this ethical dilemma for days. Elena was too young to fully understand the consequences of exposing her abuse to the world, but she was also too vulnerable to leave unprotected. "I've explained to Elena that people need to know the truth so that Victoria can never hurt her or any other child again. She's braver than both of us, Marcus. She wants to help." The truth was that Princess Elena had surprised everyone with her resilience once the burden of secrecy was lifted. When Alexander had gently explained what would happen during the television address, she had listened with the solemnity of someone far older than her 8 years. "Will Victoria go to jail like bad people in stories?" Elena had asked. "I don't know, sweetheart, but she won't be able to hurt you anymore." Elena had nodded thoughtfully. "Then I think it's okay if people know what happened. Maybe other children won't have to be scared like I was." The morning of the broadcast, Queen Mother Isabel arrived at the palace to stand with her son. Despite her age, she remained a figure of tremendous dignity and moral authority. Her presence at Alexander's side would send a powerful message about where the royal family's loyalties lay. Victoria made one crucial mistake. The Queen Mother told Alexander, as they prepared for the broadcast, she underestimated the bonds of genuine love and loyalty. She thought she could manipulate everyone the way she manipulated you. But real devotion isn't based on charm or self-interest. At exactly 10 o'clock, the kingdom's television networks carried Prince Alexander's address live from the palace's formal reception room. He sat at his father's old desk, with the royal coat of arms behind him and family photos visible on a nearby table. The setting conveyed both authority and intimacy. "My fellow citizens," Alexander began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "I speak to you today about a matter that affects not only my family, but the fundamental values we hold as a civilized society. For the past 3 years you have known my wife, Victoria, as a devoted stepmother and charitable figure. Today, I must share evidence that this public image was a carefully constructed lie. The first piece of footage began playing. Victoria entering Elena's playroom, her public smile disappearing the moment she thought she was unobserved. The kingdom watched in shocked silence as their beloved Duchess transformed into something monstrous, striking a defenseless child and threatening her with consequences if she ever told the truth. Alexander provided minimal commentary, letting the evidence speak for itself. Clip after clip showed Victoria's escalating abuse. The storage closet punishment, the forced standing exercises, the psychological torment disguised as discipline. Dr. Hartwell's medical photographs showed the physical evidence of abuse that Victoria had tried to explain away. "I failed my daughter by not seeing what was happening in my own home," Alexander continued, after the final piece of footage concluded. "I trusted a woman who exploited that trust to hurt the most precious person in my life. I take full responsibility for that failure, but I will not allow Victoria's lies about my mental state to cover up her crimes." The broadcast concluded with Alexander reading the statements from palace staff members who had witnessed Victoria's treatment of Elena. Each testimony added another nail to the coffin of her public image, painting a picture of systematic cruelty that could not be dismissed or explained away. As the address ended, Victoria was preparing to go live on the morning show, but her media advisor was frantically trying to reach her. "Victoria, you need to see this. The footage he's released. There's no way to counter this." Victoria watched the clips on her phone, her face going white as she saw herself through the objective lens of the security cameras. The evidence was devastating, undeniable, impossible to spin or explain away. Her carefully constructed narrative about Alexander's mental illness crumbled in the face of documented proof of her own cruelty.
"We need to cancel the interview," her advisor urged.
"Anything you say now will only make things worse," but Victoria's pride wouldn't allow retreat. "No, I can still salvage this. People will understand that children need discipline, that sometimes... Victoria, you struck an 8-year-old child on camera. There's no way to make that look acceptable to the public." The morning show interview proceeded, But it was a disaster from the first question. Victoria tried to maintain her composed facade, but faced with the undeniable video evidence, her exclamation sounded hollow and desperate. "I may have been stricter than modern parents prefer," she attempted. But Princess Elena was a difficult child who needed firm guidance. Sometimes love requires tough choices. The interviewer, having seen the footage of Victoria's vicious threats and physical violence, pressed harder. "You called an 8-year-old girl a spoiled little accident. How does that constitute loving discipline?" Victoria's mask finally slipped completely as she realized her position was hopeless. "You don't understand the pressures of trying to raise someone else's child." "Elena resented me from the beginning. Nothing I did was ever good enough for her or for Alexander. I gave up my own life to care for that ungrateful little—" She stopped herself, but too late. The cameras had captured her true feelings about Princess Elena, confirming everything Alexander had revealed about her character. Within hours of the broadcasts, public opinion had shifted completely. Social media exploded with outrage at Victoria's abuse and admiration for Alexander's courage in exposing it. The hashtag #ProtectPrincessElena trended worldwide, with thousands of people sharing messages of support for the little girl who had endured so much in silence. Government officials who had supported Victoria based on her accusations against Alexander quickly distanced themselves from her. Lord Bentley, who had been her strongest political ally, issued a statement expressing his horror at the evidence and his regret at being manipulated by her lies. The legal consequences followed swiftly. Child Protection Services launched a formal investigation, while criminal prosecutors began reviewing the evidence for possible charges. Victoria's charitable organizations suspended her involvement, and her honorary titles were quietly revoked. But the most significant change was in Princess Elena herself. Freed from the burden of keeping Victoria's secrets, the little girl began to blossom again. Her laughter returned to the palace halls, and she started playing with the joyful abandon that had been missing for so long. "She's like a different child," her governess Sarah reported to Alexander. "Yesterday, she actually asked if she could invite friends over to play. She hasn't wanted to see anyone outside the family for months." The healing process would take time, and Elena would need counseling to fully process the trauma she had endured. But surrounded by people who truly loved her and protected by the truth that had finally been revealed, she was beginning to reclaim her childhood. Victoria's final attempt at vindication came through a tell-all book deal she signed 6 months later. Trying to present herself as a misunderstood woman who had been unfairly vilified for attempting to properly discipline a spoiled child. The book was universally panned by critics and largely ignored by the public, who had moved on from her manufactured drama to focus on supporting Elena's recovery. Prince Alexander never remarried, choosing instead to focus entirely on raising his daughter and fulfilling his royal duties. He established a foundation dedicated to protecting children from abuse, using Elena's story as inspiration for helping other young victims find their voices. As for Princess Elena, she grew up to become a confident young woman who used her experience to advocate for children's rights. On her 18th birthday, she gave her first public speech about surviving abuse, helping countless other victims realize they were not alone and that speaking the truth, however difficult, was always the right choice. The kingdom learned that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from wearing a crown or commanding armies, but from one man's willingness to sacrifice everything to protect his daughter, and one little girl's strength to survive the unthinkable. In the end, love and truth had triumphed over manipulation and cruelty, proving that even in the corridors of power, justice could still prevail. Security Chief Marcus Thompson continued serving the royal family until his retirement, knowing that his decision to review that footage on a rainy October evening had changed the course of history. The monitors in his office still displayed feeds from throughout the palace, but now they watched over a home where a little girl could laugh freely, knowing she was truly safe at last.